The following video features excerpts from 7 recorded live lessons on drawing with colored pencils. To learn more about how you can access this video series, as well as the other recorded live lessons and courses, visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members.
You know, some people love Prismacolor and some people don't love them as much. It seems like in the colored pencil world, everybody has their favorite colored pencils, and some people really just believe strongly in the colored pencils that they use. My favorite are the Prismacolor pencils, but the polychromos pencils are also good, but they're different. And that's because the polychromos pencils are oil-based and the Prismacolor pencils are wax-based. Colored pencil on the surface, we can use the colorless blender and really mix and blend colors together. And what that is called is burnishing. So we're going to be burnishing the pencils, and it's going to give them that almost a painterly look. But to use an HB pencil, then I would suggest using an H pencil. The problem is with an H pencil, if you're not careful, since it is a harder graphite pencil, is that if you push too hard with a harder pencil, you're going to produce little grooves in the paper. And the grooves of the paper, or the grooves that you put in the paper, the colored pencil material won't go into them. So you end up with these little white lines. All right. So we've kind of got all the shapes sketched out here. Let's put a few details here in the flowers. And I'll zoom in for this. Everything's really light right now, if you can't tell already. And I'm not going to be too worried about drawing several lines for this. We're going to figure all of the values and all of the actual shapes and things out when we go to the colored pencils. Of course, whatever that other thing is. And then I'm just going to kind of roll over the surface and lift things up very lightly. Let's just go into this area here, and I'm going to kind of go through the next stages here, just in this top little area, so you can get an idea, because, you know, I really need to keep coloring this in, kind of with this light application. Maybe we'll just kind of work in different areas here, so you can kind of see the progression here. And all right, now with the dark brown. Now this is going to warm up the shadow a little bit, but the dark brown and the indigo blue are going to mix to create a more natural black. So when we go over the top of this, it's going to initially look a little bit more brown than it should be there. And now with a heavy hand, I'm going to start working this application into the tooth of the paper. And what's going to happen is the waxy bonder from the blender is going to get rid of all those little tiny specks of white. A little bit darker in an area that's kind of got a warmer color. You want to kind of stick with the brown. So we're going to start with the dark brown here, and this petal right here is predominantly a little bit darker in value. So we'll go ahead and add a layer of brown over the top. So again, I'm going back to the photo reference, and I'm still looking at it as I'm going over the top of this. So I'm just looking at kind of the mid-tone areas now, and the areas where I can push the shadows a little bit. So we don't want to get too carried away with outlining things, but we can put a few lines to indicate where the petals are a little bit different, where another petal begins or something like that. A little bit. All right, so we've got these little pattern things that are coming off around the edges. So what I'm going to do, and it's a darker value, so I'm just going to kind of lightly start creating the shapes that happen here. And remember, when you're working, you don't have to get, and here's one of those pieces of stuff that gets on there. You don't have to get exactly the same with everything, and especially something like this, like that's a handmade piece of pottery. You know, imperfections are expected. So these little shapes that happen around here, don't feel like they have to be absolutely perfect or anything like that. And so right now, all right, that's enough with the dark brown. Let's go back with the indigo blue and start pushing some of these darker values. And you might notice there's a really nice
strong shadow over here that kind of goes down the streaks down the side here. Kind of creates an interesting pattern right here. And then we've got that squash that's going to be leaning up against it. I'm not sure if you can see the pencil lines of the squash. They're very, very light right there. There's some of that ultramarine mixing in. And you can get as creative as you want with your colors. You don't have to use the colors that are in the photo reference, of course. And of course, this is adding even more wax to the surface. So you could go back with a sharpened pencil and really create some strong contrast in the lines in here. But there's really not a whole lot of strong contrast in the lines that's happening in here. Maybe, yeah. Right here on the side, there's a little bit of a highlight that happens right after that. And I'm guessing that might even be a reflection of maybe the Gordy stuff in the container. Maybe it's a little bit of a highlight, but we'll go ahead and add it with a white. And then there's a subtle reflection in the container here, and we'll go ahead and add that. And I want this to be a very light application initially. We can always push colored pencil applications to be a bit more solid and a bit heavier, but it's hard to go backwards. So it's hard to make an area lighter if we accidentally make it too dark or too intense with color. And understand that there are points along the process of application where, you know, things are going to kind of be in transition and they're not going to necessarily look how they're going to look when everything's finished. The value is not quite light enough. So I'm going to very lightly apply the sienna brown color, by the way. And just going to put a light application just like I did with the raw umber. You can barely see that raw umber in there, but it's there. All right. And of course you can always embellish things a little bit. And you know, make the contrast a little stronger, make the pattern change a little bit stronger than what it is in reality. All right, so we'll keep going, and I'm just kind of putting a little bit more of a medium pressure here on the Spanish orange. I can clean things up a little bit and just make those edges nice and strong, and maybe kind of outline things a little bit. You don't want to get carried away with the outlining. And you see we'll use the indigo blue to define the edge here instead of the brown. Now since we're going to really layer this color right here, I don't have to really get too concerned with the direction that I'm making the stroke at this point. And this makes this color a little bit warmer. It also works a little bit into the surface. So we're covering up some of those little white specks that happen. This color needs to have a good amount of depth. If you can push your colors to have that depth, then you're going to be better off. And one way that we can create more depth in the color is simply to layer more colors on top. And really try to consider what colors are made when we layer the colors on top of each other. And since this yellow-green is a warmer color, I'm going to start with the burnt umber, and we'll see where we're at with this and see if this is enough to make the value a little bit darker. And if it's not, then we'll have to use some indigo blue. But in this case, we might want the shadow to be a little bit warmer here as well. I've left a couple areas where we can kind of make some lighter applications there just to give a hint of some highlight of the vase. And you know, we've kind of got a blurry edge right here. You got that white, that light glow that's happening there. We don't want that to happen. So we've got two options. We can bring down the blue that we've used here, which is Copenhagen blue, or we can kind of try to define the edge a little bit down here. I think probably the best option might actually be to bring down the Copenhagen blue just a little bit. I think sometimes the tendency of people is to draw an outline And that's a pretty natural, tendency there. And we're kind of taught from being young kids to draw outlines of things. In fact, that's how most of us start drawing. We just sit down and draw contour lines and think we live in a world of contour lines. If I can find my colorless blender, there we go. I'm going to go ahead and put an application there. You can really see some of the wax on there. So we'll remove that before we burnish that area. We don't want any of the blue or green or any of that to mix in with these oranges. You know, sometimes, I'll just point this out, sometimes when people are using colored pencils, they get to this point and then they stop. And they're like, oh, this is my colored pencil drawing. When you got to keep going. You got to put more layers on there. Got to develop the colors. Your drawings and paintings will probably always go through stages where things kind of look funky. Okay. The colors are all in how they are relating to the colors that are around them. So you might be putting colors down in your drawing and think that they're not quite working until you put colors that are next to them, and then all of a sudden they make sense. And that's another good reason to kind of slowly build up your applications. Because if you go too dark too quick, well, there's no reversing that really. And then we'll go back with indigo blue over the top of that. I hope I said that clearly. We'll go back over the top with the indigo blue there. And that's another thing I'll just point out here. I think that another thing that stops people from working or producing or creating, and I think this actually stops people from doing a lot of the things in life that would make them happy, and that is feeling like they've got to have a plan right off from the start and have everything figured out before they even get started. And so since they can't figure everything out, and nobody can figure everything out before they get started with anything, they just don't do it. They just kind of put it off and put it off and put it off, and maybe they just don't ever do it. And I think that's true or a lot of times I think that people feel like there's got to be a plan from the start to the finish, and everything has to go perfectly as planned, and if it doesn't, then it's just not worth it. Very light with that cream color, and then we'll go over it with the white. Heavier application there. So this is a little bit yellow. It's not quite the orange that we're looking for. So we'll go back and make it a little bit more orange after we've defined each one of the stripes here. Orange, more of an orange color and less of a yellower color. And just by adding that color, you can see the contrast. That's going to make the contrast in color and value actually a little bit stronger so that we don't lose those stripes. All right, so just a very light indication of where our container is, and that's going to give us a good starting point. Now, because we've got a good idea of the contours of the container, now we can go back and start to kind of place out the pattern that's happening here. You can see we've got some threads that go vertical, and then we've got some threads that go horizontal, and then another set that goes vertical here as well. And one thing, another common mistake I see people make, and I've made this mistake plenty of times in the past, is we just start up here at the top and we start making this pattern, and then we don't realize that maybe we've made it too small, so we have to put extra ones in there, or maybe we've made it too large and it goes all the way down to the bottom or something like that. So we're going to pay special attention to this line right here and where it lines up with the edge of the pumpkin. We're going to try to get that as close as possible. And this is the actual color cream. And I'm just going to go right on top of those highlights that I put down with the white. I know it doesn't look like much yet, but remember we're working from the lighter values, and then we're going to get darker, and we'll define. But in the end, the drawing should still kind of have this
if you're going for this particular look, it still should have that heavily applied look, like it was applied heavily, even though you might slowly build up the applications. And I just don't want the shadow to get too strong and too sharp right here and detract from the other things in the image. So I'm just softening it up just a little bit. All right, we'll leave a little bit more space down here between the upper portion and the bottom portion. Of course, when we draw this gourd right here, we'll put the colors in between there. But for right now, we're going to leave it open. All right, so we'll allow those lines to kind of curve up just a little bit. And you might find that throughout your drawing process that you get a little bit more confident as the drawing progresses. And you don't have to spend quite so much time layering light to medium applications over the top. We'll just bring that cream color all the way around the side. And you can see the values are a little bit lighter. Again, right here, right here. We're going to leave a little bit right here, and we'll leave a little bit right up here at the top as well. And maybe we'll just slightly get a little bit darker towards the inside part here where it kind of dips down. And it's not really necessarily doing that in the photo reference, but maybe that will help kind of communicate that a little bit more. All right, it really feels like the light is coming through, and you know, the shadow doesn't seem that distracting. You know, ultimately the choice will, my decision on whether I need to keep it like this or make it a little bit darker will all lie on how it relates to the background, which we're going to move on to next. But first, and we can get up here, we can use the side of the pencil or the side of the art stick and you know, get real tight up in there. So you've got some, instead of a big old flat honking brush, and this smaller brush covers not a terrible amount of space, but it does the job. And I'm just going to kind of keep my strokes consistent, kind of pull them down. And of course, you can apply additional applications over the top of this. If you need to make an area darker, you need to adjust the color of the value.